Why did the Anasazi build their cities on the edge of the world? In the sun-scorched corners of the American Southwest, the canyons whisper secrets. The wind snakes through ancient stone corridors. The ruins remain, silent, still, and watching. And hidden within their shadows lies the story of a people whose past is etched into rock, but whose fate still defies complete explanation. Before we dive into why they vanished, we must first understand who they were. To know why something disappears, you must first understand what it was and who shaped it. And in the case of the ancestral Puebloans, the story of their rise is just as haunting and powerful as the story of their disappearance. The birth of a civilization, long before skyscrapers touched city skies, and long before written language carved its permanence into scrolls and tablets, a quiet but complex culture was forming among the mesas, deserts, and canyons of what is now Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. They weren't called the Anasazi in their time. In fact, they didn't leave behind a name for themselves at all, at least not in writing. The word Anasazi comes from the Navajo language and means ancient enemies, or ancient outsiders. Today, many consider this term outdated and even disrespectful. Instead, archaeologists and indigenous descendants refer to them as the ancestral Puebloans, honoring their link to modern-day Pueblo tribes like the Hopi, Zuni, Taos, and Acoma. The term Anasazi still lingers in popular culture, though. For decades, it was used in textbooks, documentaries, and museums. But it's important to use language that respects those whose ancestors lived this story. And those ancestors weren't strangers to the land. They were its stewards, builders, and dreamers. From wandering hunters to master builders. The roots of the ancestral Puebloans trace back more than 2,000 years. Early on, they were nomadic hunter-gatherers, moving with the rhythm of the land. They hunted small game, rabbits, deer, and wild turkeys, and gathered seeds, nuts, roots, and berries. Their tools were simple, their footprint light. They moved seasonally, following food and water. But something changed around 100 CE. Influenced by neighboring cultures like the Hohokam and Mogollon, they began to settle. This shift wasn't sudden. It was a slow embrace of farming, especially corn or maize, a crop so sacred and vital it became the heartbeat of their society. The transition allowed them to stay in one place longer, to plan ahead, and eventually, to build. As farming took root, so did permanence. Villages of underground pit houses grew into clusters of stone and adobe structures. What began as small family dwellings became entire communities with shared plazas, ceremonial chambers, called kivas, towers, and granaries. Over the next several centuries, their architecture would become astonishing in both scale and sophistication. By 750 CE, the ancestral Puebloans were building above-ground multi-room dwellings using sandstone, mud, and wooden beams. By 1000 CE, their cities had grown to house hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people. And these weren't randomly placed homes. Their placement aligned with solar cycles, geographic landmarks, and even cosmic events. They weren't just living in the landscape, they were shaping it in harmony with the universe. A society without writing, but not without story. The ancestral Puebloans didn't write books or carve hieroglyphics into stone, but they chronicled their lives in other ways. Petroglyphs and pictographs, carvings and paintings etched into rock faces, dot the cliffs and canyons they once called home. Spirals, human figures, animals, hands, and abstract symbols suggest everything from solar calendars to mythical journeys, from spiritual visions to warnings. And the most powerful source of their identity comes not from stone, but from living memory. The oral traditions of the Pueblo peoples, passed down for centuries, speak of migration stories, sky watchers, sacred duties, and connections to star beings, Katsina spirits, and emergence from the underworld. These aren't just myths, they're historical DNA, carried in story form. To this day, many Hopi elders will say they are the descendants of those who left the cliff dwellings. Their ceremonies continue, their prayers still offered to the same sun, moon, and stars. Ingenious architects and planners. It is impossible to talk about the ancestral Puebloans without mentioning their incredible architecture. Their greatest constructions include the towering buildings at Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and Aztec ruins. Some buildings rose 4 or 5 stories high, contained hundreds of rooms, and were arranged with such precision that their windows and doorways perfectly aligned with solstices and equinoxes. In Chaco Canyon alone, the great houses like Pueblo Bonito were marvels of engineering. Using only stone tools and human labor, they constructed semicircular buildings spanning acres with multiple stories, T-shaped doorways, and kivas sunken into the earth for rituals. The effort required to quarry stone, transport logs from miles away, and coordinate construction without writing speaks to an organized, deeply spiritual society. Their roads, too, were a marvel. Straight roads, sometimes over 30 feet wide, ran in perfectly linear paths over mountains and across canyons. Some believe these roads weren't just for transport but had ceremonial or symbolic purpose, perhaps mapping out spiritual journeys across the landscape. A culture of science, art, and spirit. They were astronomers. Their calendars tracked the sun, moon, Venus, and other celestial bodies. Rock markers and alignments reveal a detailed understanding of celestial cycles. The famous Sun Dagger site atop Fajada Butte in Chaco Canyon uses natural light and stone slabs to mark the solstices with astonishing accuracy. They were artists. Their pottery was both beautiful and functional. Black on white designs, often with repeating patterns or spiritual imagery, were passed from generation to generation. They also wove cotton garments, made turquoise jewelry, and painted colorful murals in ceremonial rooms. They were traders. From their desert cities, they exchanged goods across vast distances. Macaw feathers from Central America, copper bells from Mexico, turquoise from the Southwest, and even chocolate residue from Mesoamerica have been found in ceremonial vessels. They weren't isolated, they were connected. Complexity, not simplicity. It's tempting to view ancient people as primitive, but the ancestral Puebloans built one of the most sophisticated non-literate civilizations in North America. They had social hierarchy, spiritual leadership, civic planning, and long-distance communication. They managed scarce water through canals and check dams. They farmed in terraced fields, used stone-lined reservoirs, and adapted to the extremes of desert life. Still, life wasn't perfect. Not everyone lived equally. Elite families likely controlled trade, ceremonies, and decisions. Others labored in the fields or built under direction. As with any civilization, there was tension beneath the surface, but overall, their legacy doesn't lie in conquest or domination. It lies in the harmony they sought with their environment, their resilience in adversity, and their ability to thrive in one of the harshest climates on the continent. Foundations of the mystery. By the time we reach the 1200s, something begins to shift. The grand cities begin to empty. Villages are abandoned. Great houses go silent. And soon, the people vanish from the cliffs and mesas entirely. But where did they go? Why did they leave? And what happened to the world they built with such care? To understand the collapse, we must understand the greatness that came before it. And in the ruins, the stars, and the stories, the ancestral Puebloans still whisper their truth. Now let's dive deeper into their empty cities. Next, we journey deeper into their world, to the cities they built, the roads they walked, and the legacy they left behind. If you also love exploring history and archaeology, don't forget to drop us a comment below so we can create more videos that resonate with you. And if you could please consider supporting our work. Now let's turn back time and explore the captivating mysteries of the past. The legacy of a vanished people. When American soldiers entered the previously unexplored Chaco Canyon in 1881, they found crumbling stone walls draped in desert sands. No one knows for sure how many people once called this place home, but estimates suggest a population ranging from 4,000 to 10,000 across the Chaco region. Over several centuries, they shaped the desert itself, building homes, temples, and entire cities into the arid landscape. Yet despite leaving behind such tangible marks on the earth, their written language and history remain elusive, leaving researchers to piece together their story from artifacts, architecture, and alignment. Today, we refer to them as the ancestral Puebloans, a term that acknowledges their profound connection to the lands they inhabited and the cultural legacy they left behind. Between roughly 550 and 1300 CE, the ancestral Puebloans, formerly known as the Anasazi, created a thriving culture in the American Southwest. Their influence stretched from present-day Arizona and Utah to New Mexico and Colorado. However, unlike many other ancient societies, their written records have been lost to time, leaving us to uncover their story through archaeology and inference. The name Chaco Canyon Pueblo refers to the people and the culture, while the word Chaco Canyon describes a specific geographic location. Chaco Canyon is a valley in northwestern New Mexico, where the ancestral Puebloans established one of their most significant settlements. From humble beginnings to flourishing metropolis today, when we visit Chaco Canyon, we marvel at the ruins of great houses made of stone and sun-baked brick. But the story of this city is not one of sudden grandeur. Instead, it's a tale of humble beginnings. By the year 850, the Chaco Canyon had become the cultural and economic heart of the ancestral Puebloan world. 2 centuries of growth transformed the settlement into a hub of trade and religion. Surrounding the central plaza were major ceremonial buildings, including the famous Pueblo Bonito, meaning good houses. Chaco Canyon wasn't a walled city. Its defense came from its remoteness and a lack of easy access to vulnerable resources. This location minimized exposure to outside influences, providing a sense of security. For the ancestral Puebloans, defense wasn't an obsession, but a consideration interwoven into the fabric of their lives. A city of stone and sky, Pueblo Bonito stands as the crown jewel of Chaco Canyon. Initially constructed around 850 CE, this massive structure continued to grow until around 1150 CE, serving as the epicenter of civic, political, economic, and religious activities for almost 300 years. At its core, Pueblo Bonito embodies the essence of ancestral Puebloan architecture. The centerpiece is a large rectangular plaza surrounded by over 600 rooms, dozens of kivas, and a striking Great Kiva. Each room was approximately 15 feet square, housing multiple generations of a family with its own storage space and hearth. In the center of the plaza stood a Great Kiva, a round ceremonial chamber with thick walls and a flat roof, descending in a spiral down into the earth. Its exact uses remain a mystery, but scholars believe it played a pivotal role in religious rituals and community gatherings. On the north side of the plaza lay the largest apartment complex, consisting of 3 connected rows of rooms. Scholars speculate that this area served as the administrative and ceremonial heart of the city. Interestingly, excavations have revealed no evidence of domestic animals, weapons, or fortified structures within Pueblo Bonito. It appears that Chaco Canyon, at least its central district, was conceived as a sacred precinct, a sanctuary where the affairs of the cosmos were contemplated and directed. Beyond the plaza, numerous smaller communities dotted the landscape surrounding Pueblo Bonito, each contributing to the bustling metropolis. All of these settlements were linked by a complex network of roads and pathways, many of which were deliberately aligned with astronomical phenomena. Chaco Canyon wasn't just a city, it was a hub of trade and communication. The ancestral Puebloans traveled extensively throughout the Four Corners region and beyond, trading goods and ideas with distant cultures. In fact, evidence suggests that Chaco Canyon was the epicenter of a vast trading network extending as far south as Mexico and as far east as the Mississippi River. Through trade and diplomacy, the people of Chaco Canyon forged alliances and connections, creating a web of cultural exchange that enriched their society. In addition to its urban centers, Chaco Canyon encompassed expansive agricultural areas. The ancestral Puebloans were innovative farmers, employing techniques like terracing and irrigation to cultivate crops in the arid environment. This agricultural prowess ensured that the city's inhabitants had a steady supply of food, contributing to their prosperity. Mesa Verde, where the cliff became home. While Chaco Canyon flourished in the open desert, Mesa Verde presented a different canvas, a stage where the ancestral Puebloans painted a unique chapter of their history. By the 12th century, as climate change and ecological shifts may have driven populations westward, Mesa Verde became their haven. Here they built not just houses, but fortresses of stone, defying the very landscape they inhabited. Archaeologists have identified over 450 sites in the Mesa Verde region, each telling a part of this remarkable story. But 3 stand out, each echoing with the footsteps of their builders, their architects, their astronomers, and their priests. Cliff Palace, majestic in its grandeur, at the heart of Mesa Verde. National Park lies Cliff Palace, the largest cliff dwelling ever constructed by the ancestral Puebloans. Tucked away within a natural alcove formed by towering sandstone fins, it's a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Imagine standing before its entrance, peering up at the sky, dwarfed by the towering cliff face that shelters this remarkable dwelling. As your eyes adjust to the shadows, you begin to see the intricacies of this architectural wonder. There are over 150 rooms and 23 kivas carved into the soft sandstone, their design blending seamlessly with the natural contours of the cliff. Pathways wind around the building, traversing wooden walkways that crisscross the narrow ledges. You can almost hear the whispers of the ancestral Puebloans going about their daily lives. Access to this elevated sanctuary was no easy feat. Residents had to ascend steep ladders or navigate narrow passages cut into the cliff face, their grip aided by natural handholds and footholds. And such a design not only defied the challenges of the terrain, but also provided a sense of security against potential invaders. The Cliff Palace wasn't just a home. It was a sacred space where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms blurred. The cliff itself was a source of power, a connection to the ancestral past, and a shield against the uncertainties of the future. Long House, where the past echoes. Long House, perched atop a wide ledge overlooking the valley below, is another masterpiece of ancestral Puebloan architecture. Its name evokes images of communal spaces where stories were shared and traditions were passed down from generation to generation. Unlike the grandiosity of Cliff Palace, Long House exudes a sense of intimacy. Imagine standing within its confines, feeling the cool air of the cliffside dwelling brush against you. The darkness of the interior is broken only by shafts of sunlight piercing through crevices in the roof, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. In this subterranean realm, the rhythms of the day were dictated by the subtle shifts in light and shadow. Long House wasn't merely a shelter. It was a place of community, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of geographical challenges. Life here demanded resourcefulness, creativity, and a deep connection to the rhythms of nature. Spruce Treehouse, elevated serenity. Rising high above the ground on a natural pedestal, Spruce Treehouse offers a unique perspective on life in Mesa Verde. Its 17 rooms and 4 kivas were not just homes, but symbols of tranquility amidst the rugged terrain. Picture yourself ascending a spiral staircase cut into the rock, each step bringing you closer to the serenity of this elevated dwelling. As you reach the top, you're greeted by a view that must have awed the ancestral Puebloans centuries ago. A panorama of the surrounding valleys and mesas that stretches to the horizon. The unfolding saga. The story of Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde is an unfolding saga, one that continues to captivate the minds of archaeologists and the imaginations of those who stand in awe before their ruins. Even after centuries, their legacy endures, whispering tales of a civilization that thrived in the heart of the desert. The Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde are more than just historical sites. They're portals to another time, offering glimpses into the lives, beliefs, and innovations of a vanished people. They remind us that even in the harshest environments, life not only finds a way, it flourishes, and that the human spirit, when fueled by ingenuity and determination, can create wonders that stand the test of time. By the mid-1100s, a dramatic transformation began across the ancestral Puebloan world. The people who once thrived in sprawling canyon cities and open desert settlements began migrating upward. Quite literally, they started building homes high into the cliffsides, carving entire villages into the vertical faces of stone. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a shift in how they lived, survived, and connected with their land. But why did they make this move? And what was life truly like in these skyward sanctuaries? The move to the cliffs was likely motivated by a combination of factors. Environmental stressors such as a changing climate, resource depletion, and growing insecurity prompted this migration upward. Living high in the cliffs provided several strategic advantages. First and foremost, protection from enemies. The elevated and secluded nature of the cliff dwellings made them less vulnerable to attacks from rival groups. This was particularly important during times of conflict, or when neighboring societies experienced internal strife. The dwellings were naturally defensible, with narrow entrances and small windows that could be easily blocked or defended. Furthermore, living in the cliffs offered better climate control. In the hot summers, the high altitude provided a cooler microclimate compared to the lower lying areas. Additionally, the thick sandstone walls and the shade created by the alcoves helped to maintain a more comfortable living environment. Winters in the region could be harsh. However, the same features that provided shade in the summer also acted as insulators, helping to retain heat within the dwellings. Lastly, access to natural water seeps in alcoves, and the ability to collect rainwater also played a significant role. Building in these areas ensured a consistent source of water, which was vital for drinking and agriculture. Places like Mesa Verde, Canyon de Chelly, and Bandelier. The ancestral Puebloans selected massive sandstone alcoves created by natural erosion. These spaces offered overhangs to shield from rain and snow, and ledges for constructing multiple-story dwellings. Though harder to access, these locations allowed for easier defense and a commanding view of the land below. It should be noted that the move wasn't abrupt. It was gradual. For a time, cliff dwellings coexisted with mesatop settlements. But eventually, many of the open communities were abandoned, and the people fully committed to life on the walls of the canyon. Building a village into stone was no small feat. The ancestral Puebloans used stone hammers, chisels, and fire-hardening techniques to shape sandstone blocks. Mortar made of mud and water held the structures together. Walls were thick to insulate against temperature extremes. Roofs, floors, and support beams were made from wooden logs, often carried from forests miles away. These were not makeshift shelters. They were multi-roomed, multi-level communities, built with care and symmetry. Some had as many as 150 rooms. Structures included storage rooms, living quarters, kitchens, and most importantly, kivas, the circular ceremonial rooms built into the rock or constructed within the alcoves. The layout was intentional. Rooms were stacked in tiers, accessible by ladders or small hand and toe holds carved into the rock. Fire pits, air deflectors, and ventilation shafts ensured that smoke escaped and fresh air circulated. Many cliff dwellings included plazas for gatherings, courtyards for cooking, and reservoirs for catching rainwater. These weren't temporary hideouts. They were homes for generations. Daily life in the cliffs was a balance of survival and ceremony. Though remote, the cliffside communities were vibrant centers of activity. Women tended corn, beans, and squash on mesa tops and in terraced gardens. Men hunted deer, rabbits, and birds, or traveled to nearby settlements for trade. Pottery was a daily craft and a major cultural expression. Using clay from local sources, the ancestral Puebloans shaped bowls, jars, ladles, and canteens, decorating them with black-on-white geometric designs. Pottery was fired in open-air kilns and used for storage, cooking, and rituals. Tools were fashioned from stone, bone, and wood. They made scrapers for hides, digging sticks for farming, and weaving tools for spinning cotton and yucca fibers into sandals, blankets, and clothing. Their baskets, woven with incredible precision, were used for carrying food, water, and ceremonial items. Children learned by shadowing elders, watching, helping, and eventually mastering the skills that sustained their people. Life was not leisurely, but it was richly connected to land, season, and spirit. Religion infused every corner of the cliff dwellings. The kiva, the ceremonial heart of each community, was a sacred space. Descended into via ladder through the roof, these circular rooms were partially underground, symbolizing emergence from the underworld. Kivas contained a sipapu, a small hole in the floor symbolizing the portal through which the ancestors first emerged. Ceremonies held here marked solstices, harvests, coming-of-age rites, and spiritual storytelling. Chanting, drumming, and dancing echoed in these stone chambers, honoring the spirits and aligning the people with the cosmos. Some cliff dwellings also contained rock art, petroglyphs, and pictographs depicting animals, spirals, handprints, and spiritual beings. These images served as records, prayers, or cosmic messages, etched permanently into the walls. Rituals often followed astronomical cycles. Just as with Chaco Canyon, many cliff dwellings were aligned with solar and lunar events, signaling planting times or ceremonial days. What makes these cliff dwellings truly remarkable is their adaptive engineering. Building into rock faces required a keen understanding of weight distribution, natural light, airflow, and moisture control. The homes were cool in summer, insulated in winter, and protected from the elements. Some buildings reached 4 stories high, with interconnected rooms, balconies, and support beams embedded into the stone. Water seeped from cracks above alcoves, captured in natural basins, and sometimes diverted for use. Builders left behind little construction debris, indicating planned design and efficient material use. They even used moisture-absorbing stones to regulate humidity inside rooms and created natural gutters to divert rain away from walls. Despite their precarious locations, these structures have stood for centuries, a testament to the ingenuity and durability of their creators. In the late 1200s, the cliff dwellings represented the pinnacle of ancestral Puebloan life. They were fortresses, homes, sanctuaries, and observatories. From the cliff faces, the people watched the seasons turn, the stars shift, and the land below rise and fall in golds, reds, and greens. But even in this seeming height, shadows loomed. Something was changing. Crops became harder to grow. Droughts lasted longer. Tensions between neighboring groups may have grown. And soon, the cliffside cities, like those before them, would begin to empty. Still, for a time, life in the cliffs was a triumph of spirit, science, and community. A final golden chapter in the Anasazi legacy, written not in ink, but in sandstone, sweat, and sun. Petroglyphs and pictographs, the rock art of the ancients. Across the Four Corners region, particularly near major Anasazi sites like Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and Hovenweep, one can find thousands of petroglyphs, images chipped or carved into rock surfaces, and pictographs, which were painted with natural pigments. These weren't idle doodles. They were created with purpose and precision, often in locations difficult to reach, hinting at spiritual or ceremonial importance. Many images appear simple at first glance: spirals, zigzags, animal figures, and human-like shapes. But others are more abstract or even unsettling, depictions of horned beings, starbursts, serpents, and clusters of dots. These motifs are found repeatedly across different sites, suggesting a shared visual language or symbolic code. The spiral, for example, is among the most common Anasazi petroglyphs. Archaeologists and indigenous oral traditions suggest it may represent water, wind, migration, or the path of the sun. In some cases, spirals are aligned in such a way that a sunbeam passes directly through them on the summer solstice, hinting at a deeper celestial understanding. Celestial alignments, astronomy or spiritual mapping. Beyond the symbols themselves, where they're located often speaks volumes. In Chaco Canyon, the now famous Sun Dagger site atop Fajada Butte is a striking example. Here, 3 stone slabs cast thin beams of light that pass through spiral carving only at specific times of the year: the summer and winter solstices, and the equinoxes. For a non-literate society, this acted as a solar calendar, guiding seasonal ceremonies and agricultural cycles. Other structures at Chaco, doorways, windows, and entire building complexes, are aligned to celestial events such as lunar standstills, the zenith passage of the sun, or the rising of specific stars like Sirius. This was no accident. The ancestral Puebloans were sky watchers. They observed patterns over generations and incorporated this cosmic knowledge into the very layout of their cities. This intertwining of cosmos and culture suggests that astronomy was not just practical, but deeply spiritual. Alignments weren't simply about farming. They were about maintaining harmony with the universe. Some researchers argue that these alignments were part of a sacred geography, mapping the relationship between the heavens, the earth, and the people who live between them. Strange symbols and unsettling theories. Some symbols defy easy interpretation. Take, for instance, the Cocopelli figure, a hunchbacked flute-playing being seen across Puebloan sites. Some view Cocopelli as a fertility deity, while others see him as a symbol of trade, music, or even mischief. His ubiquity and varied interpretations only add to his mystery. Other petroglyphs depict beings with large eyes, elongated limbs, or antennae-like features, sparking fringe theories about extraterrestrial contact or lost civilizations. While mainstream archaeology dismisses such notions, these strange images continue to captivate imaginations and inspire speculative documentaries and books. One particularly puzzling site is Newspaper Rock in Utah, which contains hundreds of overlapping petroglyphs, including what appear to be star maps, animal tracks, and abstract symbols. Some researchers argue that these images function as records of significant events, hunting expeditions, or spiritual visions. In some kivas, murals have been discovered depicting beings emerging from spirals, suggesting mythological journeys or transformations. This connects directly to Hopi oral tradition, which tells of the people emerging from the underworld through a sipapu, a small hole or opening, often symbolized by a spiral or circle in art. Parallels with global mysteries. What's especially fascinating is how these mysteries echo those found in other ancient civilizations. For example, the Nazca lines in Peru, the megalithic alignments of Stonehenge, and the pyramids of Egypt all display similar patterns. Large-scale symbols, celestial alignments, and unanswered questions. In each of these cultures, architecture and art serve not just as infrastructure, but as a kind of cosmic script, a way to speak to the gods or mark humanity's place in the universe. The ancestral Puebloans, though less well-known than some of these global civilizations, clearly shared this impulse to record knowledge in durable visual forms. Whether it's the serpent mounds of North America, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, or the cliff dwellings of the Southwest, these ancient peoples used stone as their canvas and the sky as their guide. In doing so, they left behind messages that challenge us to look deeper and ask not just what they knew, but what they believed. Message or myth? So, what were the Anasazi trying to say? To archaeologists, the answer remains elusive. There's no Rosetta Stone for petroglyphs, no definitive key that unlocks their meanings. But to modern Pueblo peoples, the messages are still alive. Elders speak of migration, of cycles, of relationships with the elements and spirits. They see the symbols not as puzzles to be solved, but as sacred reminders. It is this tension between scientific curiosity and spiritual reverence that makes the mystery of Anasazi rock art so powerful. Perhaps the goal was never to explain everything. Perhaps the mystery itself was intentional, a way to draw future generations into reflection, into humility, and into communion with the forces that shape the world. Stone that speaks. In the end, the stones may never yield all their secrets, but they continue to speak. They speak to our longing for meaning, our hunger for connection, and our fascination with the unknown. The petroglyphs may not shout, but they echo. They echo through time, whispering through the cracks of ancient canyons and into the minds of all who stand before them. The enigma of their vanishing act. As we peel back the layers of Anasazi rock art, another pressing question emerges. Why did this sophisticated culture vanish almost overnight? Around the 13th century AD, the great cities of the Southwest began to empty. Chaco Canyon, once a bustling hub, became a ghost town. Great Kiva, the ceremonial heart of Pueblo life, fell into disuse. Entire communities seemingly abandoned their homes and hearth fires, leaving behind not just their dwellings, but their pottery, crops, and even tools. This sudden departure has puzzled scholars for generations. Theories abound, ranging from prolonged drought to invading nomadic tribes. Some even point to cataclysmic events like earthquakes or volcanic eruptions as potential causes. Yet despite numerous studies and excavations, a definitive answer remains elusive. What becomes clearer, however, is that the story of the Anasazi is far from a tale of complete oblivion. Their descendants, the modern Pueblo people, carry on their traditions, language, and cultural memory. Places like Taos Pueblo and Acoma Pueblo stand as living testaments to the resilience of these communities. Their rock art, far from being lost, continues to inspire awe and wonder. A call to re-examine our perspective. When we contemplate the Anasazi and their rock art, we're invited to re-examine our perspective on history. Their sophisticated understanding of astronomy, their architectural prowess, and their spiritual connection to the land challenge the notion of a simplistic timeline that measures progress in linear fashion. They remind us that different ways of knowing and being are valid, and that cultures across the globe have deep understandings of the cosmos that deserve respect and study. In the end, the Anasazi legacy isn't just about the past. It's about broadening our present and shaping a more inclusive future. Their story urges us to listen to the whispers of the ages, to honor the wisdom of indigenous cultures, and to recognize that sometimes the greatest discoveries are the ones that have been right in front of us all along. In the hushed tones of an ancient Pueblo elder, "Look to the mountains, my child, for they have eyes. Listen to the rivers, for they carry stories on their backs. The spirits of our ancestors dance in the flames of the sunset. And the stars, the stars sing songs older than time itself." What do you think the Anasazi were trying to tell us? Share your thoughts below. Chaco Canyon was here for a long time. People lived there for 800 years, raising families, making homes, living a life. But then they picked up and left. All the houses are empty, and we don't know why. They didn't leave behind any records or documents explaining their departure. So today we're going to try to figure out what happened, how their world began to unravel. Let's start at the beginning. There's nothing like staring up at a towering cliff dwelling and imagining the lives of those who made it their home. We'll start today with Pueblo Bonito, which means beautiful houses. It sits at the top of a sandstone bluff overlooking Chaco Canyon. If you visited, you would see that it's a bit of a maze, all these rooms and passageways winding together. You can imagine children playing tag, mothers carrying water, fathers weaving baskets, everyone going about their daily routines, working together to keep their world running smoothly. That's one of the things that made the Anasazi special. They were incredibly hard workers. Wherever they settled, they made their homes blend into the landscape. That's why today we call them the ancestral Puebloans. They literally wove themselves into the fabric of the land. They took the natural materials available to them, sandstone and wood, mud mortar and grass thatch, and wove those into lasting homes. But homes aren't enough to make a civilization. A society needs more than shelter. It needs food and water. The Anasazi were smart, though. They figured out how to farm along the rivers. They dug ditches to capture the little water that flowed through the canyons. They created terraces on hillsides, step-by-step gardens to hold back the soil, to hold back the silt, and they planted corn and beans and squash. They were experts at coaxing life out of the desert. They also understood the animals around them, how they moved, and when they came back each year. They hunted deer and rabbits and turkeys, and in the sky, they watched the stars. Even today, people like the Hopi and the Zuni still talk about their knowledge of astronomy and how the Anasazi used the constellations to plan their days. They were incredibly organized, too. They had to be to build huge apartment complexes out of sandstone and wood. They worked together, helping each other carry beams and blocks up tall ladders to construct these homes atop cliffs. They had leaders, and they had ceremonies. Archaeologists uncovered great kivas, big circular rooms where they gathered as a community, where they held feasts and ceremonies, where they prayed together for rain. They loved dancing and music too, and the sound of drums and rattles probably echoed through these canyons for hundreds of years. Life there was bustling and busy and prosperous. There was plenty to eat, and everyone seemed to be thriving. Chaco Canyon was the center of all of this activity, a hub where traders came from faraway lands to bring turquoise and copper and other treasures. It was almost like a mall, if malls had been built into cliffs and if people traveled on foot or horseback instead of cars. But sometime after 1150 AD, everything changed. The Anasazi didn't leave behind any written records, so we have to piece together their story from the physical remains, from the pottery shards, and the animal bones, and the corn cobs left behind in trash piles, from the architecture and the abandoned rooms. And what we find is fascinating. Around 1150 AD, Chaco Canyon started to look a lot different. Homes were destroyed, the roads were ripped up, pottery styles changed. Suddenly, Chaco Canyon didn't seem like such a busy hub anymore. There were fewer visitors coming and going. Chaco Canyon had been a great center of trade and culture for hundreds of years, but now it was just a shadow of its former self. People trickled out of Chaco Canyon and headed south towards the Mesa Verde. By 1300, it was completely abandoned. The only sounds were the wind whipping through the canyons and the birds circling overhead. So why did they leave? Why did they abandon their homes? Why did they turn away from their ancestors and the spirits of the place? Some say it was the environment, that the changing climate and limited water supplies forced them to move. Others argue that it was a combination of things, that maybe they fought with other tribes, or that their social structure crumbled, or that the land itself began to fight back against its people. We don't know for sure. But what we do know is that this story isn't unique. It's a story that's repeated itself throughout history, and it's a story that continues to play out today. The Anasazi thrived in one of the most inhospitable environments in North America. Today, much of the American Southwest is a desert. Canyons are dry and the sun beats down mercilessly on the parched earth. But for centuries, the Anasazi flourished there. They learned how to farm in the dry soil, how to harvest the few plants that managed to grow in the high altitude and harsh climate. They built homes into the cliffs out of the red sandstone that stained the canyons like blood, and they survived. But as the centuries passed, the climate began to change. The rains, which had always been unpredictable, became less predictable. The winters, which had always been cold, became colder. The summers, which had always been hot, became hotter. The Anasazi knew this because they kept track of the cycles of nature, just like their modern-day descendants, the Hopi and the Zuni. They watched the stars and they recorded the planting and the harvesting of crops and the changing of the seasons, and they saw that something was happening. The rains were coming later and lasting shorter. The snows were melting faster. The temperatures were shifting, and with that, their way of life was slipping away. They farmed along the rivers, gathering the little water that flowed through the canyons and building ditches to irrigate their crops. But as the rains fell less and less, the water table dropped and the soil grew harder and harder to farm. They carefully terraced the hillsides, step-by-step garden to hold back the soil, to hold back the silt and the sand. But erosion crept up higher and higher. Plants died, and animals moved away from the dwindling water sources. People, too, started to leave. Chaco Canyon was once a bustling hub of activity, but by 1150 AD, it was starting to look like a ghost town. The homes were empty. The Great Kiva sat silent. The roads leading in and out of Chaco Canyon tell the story. They were ripped apart, suggesting a hasty departure. People weren't moving their belongings or packing their valuables. They were grabbing what they could and running. And then they were gone. Some scholars believe that the Anasazi didn't just pick up and leave because of the changing climate. Instead, they were driven out, pushed away by a growing population and dwindling resources. More people meant more mouths to feed and more pressure on the land. As the soil grew harder to work and water supplies dwindled, the Anasazi became desperate. They fought with neighboring tribes. They raided each other's villages and stole livestock and food. They competed for farming lands and hunting grounds and survival. Eventually, they turned on each other, and the very people who had once come together to build great houses began tearing each other down. But another explanation is lurking in the shadows, a mysterious presence that has fascinated scholars for years. Some say that the Anasazi collapse was caused by something sinister, a dark force that haunted the canyons and drove the people away. They point to strange petroglyphs and artifacts that seem to appear overnight, as if carved by an unseen hand. They speak of rituals and ceremonies that ventured into the realm of the unknown, where the line between this world and the next was blurred. Was there a malevolent force that drove the Anasazi mad? Did they conjure up a darkness they couldn't control? Or were they simply victims of a changing climate, driven out by forces beyond their power? As we stand here looking out over Chaco Canyon, surrounded by the silence of 800 years, we wonder what happened here. Why did this once great civilization disappear without a trace? We may never know the full story. The Anasazi didn't leave behind any written records or documents, and all we have to go on are the whispers of the wind through the canyons, and the stories told by their descendants, the Hopi, the Zuni, the Acoma, and the Taos. Maybe it was the changing climate, or maybe it was a combination of things. Maybe it was social strife or mysterious forces. Whatever happened, the Anasazi left behind a legacy that continues to inspire awe and wonder today. Today, Chaco Canyon is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. People come from all over the world to marvel at the engineering feats of the Anasazi, and to try to understand how a civilization so advanced could have disappeared so completely. But maybe they didn't completely disappear. Maybe they're still here, living in the mesas and the canyons, watching us from the cliffs, waiting for us to learn from their mistakes. Of all the mysteries surrounding the ancestral Puebloans, perhaps none is as unsettling or as fiercely debated as the evidence of violence and cannibalism uncovered in their final centuries. This chapter confronts the darker theories of the Anasazi collapse, peeling back layers of archaeology, controversy, and cultural tension to examine whether war, starvation, ritual, or something else altogether contributed to the end. The bone evidence. What remains after the fire? Archaeologists began to piece together signs of violence as early as the 1970s. At sites like Cowboy Wash in southwestern Colorado, remains were found showing trauma inconsistent with natural death. Human bones bore cut marks identical to those made when animals were butchered. Some showed signs of being boiled or burned, with marrow cavities split open to extract nutrients. Burned cooking pots even contained traces of human hemoglobin. These were not isolated findings. Several other sites, including Castle Rock Pueblo and Mancos Canyon, produced remains with similar indicators: smashed skulls, dismembered skeletons, and bones that had been roasted. What was going on? Were the Anasazi engaging in cannibalism? And if so, why? Cannibalism, survival, ritual, or terror tactic? One theory posits that these acts were driven by survival cannibalism, a last resort during periods of extreme starvation, such as the droughts and crop failures previously discussed. In this scenario, families or entire communities facing famine turned to consuming the dead or even the murdered to stay alive. Another theory, more controversial, is ritual cannibalism, a practice seen in some ancient cultures where consuming human flesh was part of spiritual or religious rites. Proponents argue that the specific nature of the bone processing suggests ceremonial activity rather than chaotic desperation. Then there's the social terror theory. Anthropologist Christy Turner proposed that a group from outside the traditional Puebloan culture, perhaps invaders or religious extremists, used cannibalism as a weapon of psychological control. By publicly dismembering and consuming victims, these groups instilled fear and dominance, undermining social order and cohesion. This theory gained traction with the discovery of sites where victims appeared to have been displayed or processed in communal areas, acts meant to be seen. If true, it suggests a breakdown not just of environment and resources, but of cultural taboos and social norms. The controversy in academia. These theories have sparked intense debate. While some archaeologists accept the physical evidence as indicative of cannibalism, others urge caution, pointing to alternative explanations. Could cut marks have resulted from mortuary practices or even scavenging animals? Are we misinterpreting signs through the lens of modern bias? There's also the concern of cultural sensitivity. The descendants of the ancestral Puebloans, modern Pueblo peoples, often view such claims as offensive or misleading. To them, these theories risk painting their ancestors as barbaric or savage, undermining a rich and dignified cultural heritage. Indigenous leaders have challenged archaeologists to consider the spiritual dimensions of their interpretations and to respect oral traditions, which rarely mention cannibalism. Some argue that what looks like cannibalism may be misunderstood ritual defleshing, a form of respectful body preparation for the afterlife. Other signs of violence, warfare, and raiding. Whether or not cannibalism occurred, there is undeniable evidence of increasing violence and conflict during the Anasazi's final centuries. Fortified cliff dwellings, stockpiled weapons, and signs of burned villages point to a society under siege. Mass graves and skeletal remains suggest raids and massacres. In some locations, entire communities appear to have been wiped out in sudden, brutal attacks. For instance, at the site of Sacred Ridge, near Durango, over 35 individuals were found dismembered, their bones smashed and scattered. Such brutality speaks to deep-seated tensions, possibly over land, water, or religious disputes. These acts could have stemmed from internal tribal warfare, factionalism, or conflict with migrating groups. As populations moved to more defensible locations, competition for arable land and water would have escalated. Alliances may have fractured. Religious schisms may have fueled ideological warfare. The psychological landscape of collapse. In times of extreme duress, societies can descend into behaviors previously unthinkable. Fear, hunger, and uncertainty create a psychological environment ripe for violence. People search for scapegoats, turn against former allies, or succumb to desperation. In this context, acts of brutality, even cannibalism, may not be aberrations but symptoms of a system in collapse. When infrastructure fails, when trust erodes, and when every resource becomes contested, humanity's darker instincts can surface. And the archaeological record, gruesome as it is, may be capturing these final spasms. But we must also resist sensationalism. These stories, while compelling, are often framed by modern media and popular culture to provoke shock. In reality, the truth is far more complex. The collapse of the Anasazi world was not a descent into savagery. It was the painful, chaotic transformation of a society trying to survive amid impossible odds. Myth or memory? Some Pueblo elders believe that these tales of violence have been preserved, not in archaeological reports, but in myth. Stories of corrupt leaders, spiritual disconnection, or communities punished by the gods echo the realities of social decay. These aren't just legends, they're warnings. Warnings about what happens when we forget the balance that sustains us. Warnings about arrogance, overconsumption, and the failure to adapt. Whether expressed through bones, stories, or symbols, the message is the same. Collapse is a human story, and it's always closer than we think. The final verdict? So was it war, cannibalism, internal collapse, a spiritual migration? Likely all of these and more. The end of the Anasazi world was not a clean break, but a fraying tapestry, woven with hunger, hope, fear, and resilience. It left behind echoes in stone, whispers in canyons, and bones that refused to lie still. In the end, perhaps the question isn't what happened to them. Perhaps the real question is, what will we do with what they left behind? This final chapter asks the question, what happened to the Anasazi? It's the big question we've been circling since the series began. But to answer it, we need to address a premise embedded in the question itself. The idea that the Anasazi did in fact vanish. A closer examination of the archaeological record reveals intriguing clues about what might have happened next. As the great cities were gradually emptied, evidence suggests that the Anasazi did not disappear, but rather dispersed across the southwest. Styles of pottery, architectural elements, and agricultural techniques previously associated with particular locales started showing up elsewhere, particularly in areas now inhabited by the Hopi, Zuni, and Rio Grande Pueblo tribes. For example, at sites like Homolovi in Arizona and the Rio Grande Valley settlements, archaeologists found artifacts and architectural designs that echo those found at Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde, suggesting a cultural migration and continuity. These clues indicate that the Anasazi didn't disappear. They moved, taking their knowledge, spirituality, and community values with them. But why did they move? Drought, resource depletion, and perhaps social pressures are likely to have played a part. But so too were probably spiritual considerations. The idea of movement, of cyclical relocation, is a core element in many native oral traditions, including those of the Navajo, Hopi, and Zuni. Migration wasn't always a response to crisis. It was sometimes a fulfillment of prophecy or a spiritual journey. In the Hopi worldview, for instance, the migration from the Four Corners region to their current mesas in northern Arizona is a well-known part of their history. According to their oral traditions, the Hopi people, along with several other Puebloan groups, originally lived in the Chaco Canyon area. Over time, due to a combination of environmental changes, social pressures, and spiritual prophecies, they began their journey northward. The Hopi tell of a great exodus when several hundred families set out from Chaco, guided by their spiritual leader, a man named Sotuku, or the White Painted Man. They walked for days until they reached a place called Walpi, now known as Hotevila, where they stayed for a while. Eventually, following Sotuko's guidance, they moved again, traveling up a winding path until they saw a beautiful valley surrounded by tall red walls. They called it Hopi, meaning peaceful valley, and they made it their home. This oral tradition is supported by archaeological evidence. The pottery styles, architectural elements, and agricultural techniques found at sites inhabited by early Hopi populations show clear links to Chaco Canyon and the wider Anasazi culture. Cultural threads, continuity, not collapse. Modern Pueblo tribes strongly affirm their ancestral connection to the Anasazi. The Hopi, for instance, speak of a long migration journey that brought them to their current mesas in northern Arizona. Their language, ceremonies, and social structures bear striking resemblance to what archaeologists have reconstructed from Anasazi sites. For instance, the Hopi have a deep reverence for the layered past and see themselves as living within a continuous chain of history stretching back millennia. This perspective challenges the idea of collapse and points instead to a transformation, a rerouting of ancient traditions in new soil. Many Hopi clans trace their lineage back to specific locations within the Four Corners region, affirming their ancestral ties to the Anasazi. These connections are not merely historical. They are living, breathing links that ensure the survival of Anasazi cultural threads. One striking example of this continuity is the Hopi rain dance, a ceremony designed to bring water to the parched lands of the Southwest during times of drought. The origins of the rain dance can be traced back to the ancestral Puebloans, and its purpose has remained unchanged for centuries. In modern Hopi society, the rain dance is not just a ritual, it's a lifeline, a way of ensuring the survival of the community in the face of environmental challenges. The dance is a physical manifestation of the intangible cultural legacy of the Anasazi, demonstrating how ancient traditions evolve to meet the needs of each generation. Ceremonial plazas, the use of kivas in specific ritual cycles, also reflect ancient practices. Ceremonial plazas are spaces used for important community gatherings, dances, and rituals. The Hopi and Zuni peoples still hold ceremonies in these plazas, which often serve as the center of village life. Kiva, or underground ceremonial chambers, are another enduring feature. These round rooms, buried partially in the ground, served multiple purposes in ancestral Puebloan society. They were used for religious ceremonies, political meetings, and community gatherings. And today, the Hopi and Zuni continue to use kiva for traditional ceremonies and rituals, ensuring the survival of these ancient architectural traditions. Ritual cycles also demonstrate continuity. The Hopi, for instance, perform a series of rituals that correspond to the phases of the moon, the changing seasons, and significant astronomical events. These rituals connect the Hopi to the rhythms of nature and to the spiritual practices of their ancestral Puebloan forebears. By observing and participating in these cycles, the Hopi reaffirm their identity and cultural heritage, keeping the spirit of the Anasazi alive in their daily lives. Sacred knowledge passed down. The descendants of the Anasazi don't just remember, they embody their legacy. Through language, ritual, and daily life, they continue to live out the values, lessons, and spiritual teachings of their ancestors. The transmission of sacred knowledge from one generation to the next is a testament to the resilience of the Anasazi cultural legacy. Songs, stories, ceremonial dances, and origin myths are still passed down from generation to generation, encoding history, cosmology, and morality. Oral tradition plays a vital role in the identity of the Hopi and Zuni peoples. Through it, they maintain a direct connection to the ancestral Puebloans. In the Hopi language, for instance, there are numerous words and phrases that echo the daily life, customs, and environment of the ancestral Puebloans, reflecting a shared history and cultural continuity. The very land the Hopi inhabit is imbued with the stories and memories of their ancestors. Place names in the Hopi language often refer to historical events, legendary figures, or the natural features of the landscape as observed by the ancestral Puebloans. These names serve as tangible reminders of the ongoing connection between the Hopi people and their ancestral Puebloan heritage. For outside observers, this raises an important point. Not all history is written in stone. Some of the most enduring truths are carried in song, spoken around firelight, danced in ceremony. So when we ask where the Anasazi went, we must also ask where we are willing to look. Because if we look closely enough, not just in the deserts, but in the hearts of people, we may find they never really left. The Anasazi are remembered in the vibrant cultures and enduring traditions of the modern Pueblo tribes, especially the Hopi and Zuni. They are remembered in the songs they sing, the stories they tell, the ceremonies they perform, and the landscapes they inhabit. The Anasazi are not merely a thing of the past. They are an integral part of the living, breathing cultures of the southwestern United States. Their legacy is a testament to the power of human resilience and cultural continuity. The story of the Anasazi is a reminder that history is not a static set of events frozen in time, but a dynamic, ever-evolving narrative that continues to shape our world today. So where did the Anasazi go? Perhaps they didn't go anywhere. Perhaps they are here, all around us, if only we have the eyes to see it. The Anasazi didn't vanish. They evolved. The Anasazi were not just builders of great houses. They were builders of worlds. Their world was ordered as much by spirit as by stone. Their lives were guided by the language of the cosmos, written in the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. When they stood within the walls of their great houses, they weren't just sheltering from the elements. They were standing in the embrace of a larger story. This story began thousands of years ago when the ancestral Puebloans emerged in the Chaco Canyon. Here, in the heart of the desert, beneath the relentless gaze of the sun, they built their first great houses. Chaco Canyon became the hub of a burgeoning civilization. People came from distant lands to trade, to learn, and to pay homage to the spiritual power that thrummed through the canyon. But this power wasn't confined to one place or time. It was woven into the very fabric of their existence. The ancestral Puebloans didn't just live by the stars, they lived with the stars. Every sunrise was a ceremony. Every full moon, a celebration. Their days were measured by the shadows' dance on the walls of their homes. Their feasts were timed with the ripening of the crops under the sun's watchful eye. The cosmos was their calendar and their scripture. And nowhere was this more evident than in the places they chose to build. Chaco Canyon, with its natural amphitheater, became the center of this cosmic ballet. The Chetro Kettle, or Gray House, was the jewel of the canyon. Its massive walls, still standing defiantly after centuries, were aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. Twice a year, the rising sun would paint the canyon floor with light, marking the turning of the seasons. At the summer solstice, when the sun reached its zenith, casting long shadows over the canyon's edge, the ancestral Puebloans knew it was time for planting. And when the sun's rays divided the day and night equally at the equinoxes, they celebrated the balance of nature and honored the interconnectedness of all things. These moments weren't just astronomical phenomena. They were divine messages, reminders that the fate of their world was intertwined with the rhythms of the universe. For the ancestral Puebloans, understanding these rhythms was more than a matter of practicality. It was a spiritual calling. They didn't just observe the cosmos, they participated in it. But as the centuries passed, the spiritual currents shifted. The ancestral Puebloans, driven by a need for water or perhaps in search of new spiritual frontiers, moved from Chaco Canyon to the Mesa Verde. Here, nestled among the red rocks, they built their most magnificent dwellings. The Cliff Palace with its 200 rooms was a testament to their architectural genius, but it was also an extension of their spiritual evolution. The movement away from the open spaces of Chaco Canyon mirrored their journey inward, a journey into the mysteries of the psyche. In the heart of these cliff dwellings were the kivas, circular, subterranean ceremonial rooms. These were more than just gathering places. They were gateways between worlds. To reach them, one often had to descend a ladder from the outside, a symbolic descent into the depths of the earth. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of sage and wood smoke. The earthen walls were adorned with symbols that whispered of ancient stories. And in the center, a small hole in the floor, the sipapu, connected the inhabitants to the spiritual realm. According to their beliefs, it was through this hole that the first people emerged from the underworld. It was through this hole that the spirits of their ancestors walked. It was through this hole that they could communicate with the unseen forces that shaped their world. The kiva was a microcosm of their beliefs, a reflection of the cosmos. Just as the universe was a great cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, so too was the ritual performed within the kiva. It was a place of transformation, where men could become women, where the old could be reborn as the young. It was here that the ancestral Puebloans enacted their creation stories, stories of how the world was brought into being and how humanity took its place in the grand tapestry of existence. These stories weren't mere tales. They were blueprints, instructions on how to live, how to interact with the forces of nature and the spirit world. They taught about balance, about the delicate equilibrium that held their world together. They spoke of the respect and reverence that was due to the earth, the sky father, the sun and moon, and all the celestial beings that guided their destiny. They were stories of heroes and tricksters, of good and evil, of the trials and triumphs of those who came before. Through these stories, the ancestral Puebloans kept their cultural memory alive. They ensured that the wisdom of their ancestors was passed down to each new generation. It was in the kivas that the heartbeat of their culture could be felt, the pulse of their collective soul. But as the centuries rolled on, the ancestral Puebloans faced challenges. Droughts, dwindling resources, and perhaps internal conflicts drove them from their mountain homes. The great houses were abandoned, their interiors filled with the echoes of footsteps that would never return. Yet their spiritual essence lingered, woven into the very fabric of the canyons. It's almost as if the ancestral Puebloans believed that their connection to the land and the cosmos was stronger than any physical structure they could build. Their legacy is etched into the landscape itself. At Mesa Verde, the detachment of the cliff dwellings from the spiritual core of the ancestral Puebloans is striking. The abandonment of their ceremonial centers suggests a profound shift, a severing of the very ties that had bound them to the land. The dwellings became residences, the kivas fell into disuse, and the rhythmic pulse of ceremonies was replaced by the silence of empty rooms. It's as if the ancestral Puebloans, when faced with the necessity of leaving, chose to leave only their footprints on the stones and their prayers in the winds. They carried their spiritual essence with them, ensuring that the land they left behind would remain sacred. Today, the Chaco Culture National Historical Park and the Mesa Verde National Park stand as silent witnesses to this ancient civilization. They echo with the footsteps of those who once called these places home. And while the ancestral Puebloans may have left these earthly dwellings millennia ago, their connection to the land remains unbroken. Their descendants, the modern Pueblo peoples, keep the traditions alive. Ceremonies are performed, stories are shared, and the wisdom of the ancients is honored. It's a living legacy, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And if you stand in the right place at the right time, if you listen with your heart and your soul, you might just hear the whispers of the ancestral Puebloans carried on the winds of change. The ancestral Puebloans didn't just respond to the rhythms of the cosmos, they embodied them. Their architecture, their rituals, their very way of life was an expression of the spiritual currents that flowed through the universe. Their story is a reminder that we too are part of this cosmic dance, that we too have a responsibility to honor the rhythms of the planet and the interconnectedness of all living things. As we conclude our journey through the legacy of the ancestral Puebloans, let us carry with us the lessons they've left for us. Let us strive to live in harmony with the earth, to seek wisdom in the stars, and to find strength in the stories of our ancestors. For in doing so, we continue the dialogue that began millennia ago in the heart of the desert, a dialogue between humanity and the cosmos, between the past and the present, between the seen and the unseen. And who knows, maybe in some small way, we can help ensure that the ancestral Puebloans aren't just a whisper in the wind, but a song in the hearts of those who come after. If you enjoyed learning about the Anasazi, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating historical tales. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the wonders of our past.